Hey everyone, and welcome back. Today, we're bringing you an explainer that digs right into the very bedrock of how our societies handle rule breaking. We are taking a deep dive into the underlying philosophies of our criminal justice system. Have you ever wondered why the system operates the way it does, or why certain policies seem to constantly swing back and forth? Well, a lot of it comes down to this foundational concept known as the crime control model. And let me tell you, breaking down the source material on this is going to be incredibly eye-opening.
So think about this for a second. What is the absolute primary function of criminal courts? Is it to protect civil liberties, or is it to suppress crime at all costs? It sounds like a philosophical riddle, doesn't it? But how you answer this fundamental question hooks directly into how you view justice as a whole. As we'll see today, the answer entirely depends on which legal framework you subscribe to. If you lean toward one side, the system looks completely different than if you lean toward the other.
All right, here's our roadmap for today. First, we'll be defining crime control. Then, we'll look at the justice assembly line. After that, we'll trace the evolution of sovereign control. And finally, we'll wrap up by evaluating the model. Let's get right into it.
Section 1. Defining crime control.
So what exactly is the crime control model? Simply put, it's a legal perspective stressing that the primary function of criminal courts is to punish offenders to control crime. It's a very specific, highly targeted viewpoint. In this model, the courts are viewed primarily as the ultimate guardians of law and order, rather than just being these abstract upholders of impartial justice. Their job, first and foremost, is the strict repression of criminal conduct. The core logic supporting this framework is actually pretty stark. It argues that if law enforcement fails to bring criminal conduct under tight control, it leads directly to the breakdown of public order. And if public order breaks down, well, an important condition of human freedom just disappears. Essentially, the argument goes like this. If crime goes unchecked, law-abiding citizens become victims, their security is diminished, and their liberty is literally stolen. Therefore, efficiently repressing crime is seen as the only way to actively guarantee freedom for the wider society. The justice process itself becomes the ultimate guarantor of your social freedom. To really wrap our heads around this model, we have to contrast it with due process. Now, crime control values stress the absolute goal of convicting the guilty, even if it means risking the conviction of some people who might actually be innocent, or maybe infringing on some civil liberties along the way. Due process values, on the flip side, prioritize civil liberties to ensure the innocent are acquitted, even if that means some guilty people walk free. In the crime control model, formal procedural rules, they're often just viewed as mere obstacles standing in the way of securing a conviction. The ultimate aim is punishing and deterring, so the system literally cannot afford a high acquittal rate.
Moving right along to Section 2, the justice assembly line.
Back in 1964, a scholar named Herbert Packer captured this practical application brilliantly. He wrote, "The crime control model is like an assembly line or a conveyor belt which, beginning with a presumption of guilt, moves the offender to workers at fixed stations." I mean, think about that imagery for a second. A conveyor belt. It perfectly visualizes a system with an absolute uncompromising demand for speed and efficiency. Unlike the due process model, which presumes innocence and kind of acts like an obstacle course, the crime control model begins with a presumption of guilt just to keep that belt moving.
So how does this conveyor belt actually operate? It runs in 3 highly efficient steps. Step 1 is to screen suspects with maximum efficiency. Step 2 is to determine guilt as rapidly as possible. And Step 3 is to secure the appropriate punishment to just close the file. The workers at those fixed stations, the police, the prosecutors, the judges, they all perform their specific tasks on each case to bring it one step closer to being a finished product. And in this system, the finished product is a closed file and a punished offender. Speed and finality are absolutely the ultimate metrics of success here.
Okay, Section 3. Evolution of sovereign control. Let's take a quick step back in time. Historically, before the modern era, say back in the 18th century, crime control relied on what was called the bloody code. These were spectacular, brutal, public punishments designed specifically to show the power of the sovereign. But by the 19th century, classical reformers started criticizing this brutality, and they introduced concepts of rationality and utilitarianism. Finally, we reach the modern era, which the academic David Garland referred to in 1996 as sovereign crime control. This is where the state provides security using a massive, sophisticated network of police, courts, and multi-agency institutions to achieve its crime control ends right within its borders.
The whole philosophical justification for this is rooted in social contract theory. As noted by Hughes in 1998, this is the idea that the government's authority to punish stems from an unwritten but completely binding contract. Basically, we the citizens agree to surrender certain absolute freedoms and accept state control measures, specifically to secure our overall freedom against the invasive or harmful actions of others. So the punishment of an offender is justified solely by its contribution to preventing future harm to the rest of society.
And that brings us to Section 4, Evaluating the Model.
When we look around at modern society, the crime control model translates directly into some very familiar policy movements. As outlined by academics like Hudson, Stenson, and Cowell, this model is explicitly associated with get tough on crime policies, the rhetoric that prisons work, and zero-tolerance policing strategies. However, an important objective observation made by Stenson and Cowell in 1991 is that these movements are often driven far more by political concerns and public optics than by purely unalloyed scientific endeavors. We're just reporting this strictly from the academic perspective here, highlighting how philosophy really shapes political action.
But radical academic evaluations highlight three major, unintended consequences of this model. First up is the criminogenic effect, which is the idea that harsh crime control measures might actually cause more crime rather than prevent it. Second is the argument of ineffectiveness, suggesting that simply processing people on a conveyor belt fails entirely to address why they committed the crime in the very first place. And third, critics argue that a true structural focus is needed. They assert that the most effective crime control relates to fixing deep social and economic structures rather than just endlessly expanding the police and prison systems.
And you know, this critique is particularly sharp when it comes to juveniles. A lot of academics who study youth justice argue strongly for minimal intervention. The big concern here is that pulling a young person onto that rigid, unforgiving assembly line we discussed earlier might do far more harm than good. It could permanently label them and actually exacerbate their future offending, rather than rehabilitating them.
We're going to wrap up today's explainer with a deeply pessimistic yet highly provocative warning from Niels Christie in 1993. He wrote, "Crime control has become an industry with unlimited potential for growth and which presents very real danger for the value of human life." It forces us to ask a really critical question. If the justice assembly line is built purely for efficiency and punishment, and if it constantly expands its reach to ensure social order, at what point does the machinery itself become a threat to the very human liberty it was originally designed to protect? Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive into the source material. I really hope it gave you a new lens through which to view the mechanisms of justice all around us.